Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Nathan Baird, Andrew Gillis. And it's drafting time. We do a lot of drafts on this pod. Andrew, this is the first one you're going to be partaking in. And this one's just very simple. We've talked to a lot of players. We've talked a lot of football. We've talked a lot of quarterback talk. So we're just going to spend the rest of this week having some fun. Drafting the best 15 players on offense. And then on Friday, we'll come back and we'll do the best players on defense. Andrew, we are going to give you the number one pick. I think there is a consensus on who we think the number one pick is, but, just like in real life, sometimes the draft can go a little skewy, especially when I have the number one pick because I sometimes go off the board a little bit. So to get straight into it, Andrew, who are you taking as the best player on Ohio State's offense entering the 2023 season?
Yeah, this very much feels like the NFL team has been given an expansion team, or the expansion team gets the first overall pick. So I felt good about that. I feel very good that I'm taking Marvin Harrison Jr. I was kind of thinking like, man, it would be sick to have that guy. So yeah, I have Marv, and I thought about it for 0 seconds. It was an instantaneous, I have the number one pick. I'm taking Marv. Cool. I don't think anybody else would have taken anybody else. I think every listener would have taken Marv, or most listeners, I should hope. I think you guys would have taken Marv. You're talking about a guy who's one of the best, players in college football, let alone receivers. You're talking about a guy who 1,200 yards last year, 14 touchdowns. He can do it all. I felt good with Marv. I took Marv. Wasn't complaining about it, so very happy with it.
Nathan, is that who you have taken with the first pick?
Oh, yeah, very clearly. Someone who already is, I think, considered one of the best pound-for-pound football players in the country, maybe the best. If you were to just poll everyone, I'm sure Caleb Williams would get some votes there, but as far as just the complete package and what he means to sort of define his position in the sport this year, very few people in that category. So that means there's nobody else on this roster that rises to that level. He is in a tier to himself. And it's, I hate to bring this up, but a year ago at this time, we would have been having similar conversations, not quite the same, about Jackson Smith-Njigba. He wasn't coming off a unanimous All-America season, obviously, but he was coming off a record-setting season and was poised to then be the dude that leading this offense, the centerpiece of the offense. And now it's interesting to see, maybe, hopefully, we get to see what a second year can be for those guys. Because we were very interested to see how teams were going to react to Jackson Smith-Njigba and what Ohio State was then going to do to maximize Jackson Smith-Njigba when it knows everybody is trying to take him away. And the conversation is similar, even though the position flips a little bit within the wide receiver alignment with Marvin Harrison. And I'm curious what Ohio State's going to do proactively to maximize him as a weapon against what they assume the defenses are going to try to do. And then how do they react when defenses maybe throw something that they weren't expecting? What does it mean for this offense? He just carries such a gravity into this season. So much of what we think Ohio State will look like as far as gaining yards and scoring points, he is the pivot guy that all of that revolves around, I think, even more than the quarterback. Because, as I've said before, as other people have said, these quarterbacks are, at the end of the day, in that same mold, more or less. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is still the guy who most determines what a given important play, maybe is the best way to say it, looks like for Ohio State in 2023.
You brought Jackson Smith-Njigba and maybe it's a different alignment, but maybe sometimes it won't be. He talked about the problem that he can potentially be in this slot this year. It won't be a normal part of things, but in bigger games where they're trying to create mismatches, maybe we see him motion into the slot at some times, like we saw against Georgia. He was number one for me. Andrew, you said that you think everybody who listens to this pod would have voted Marvin Harrison Jr. There, my friend, you would be wrong. He did get the bulk of the votes. He got 95.2% of the votes, but he is not the only person who got a first-place vote. 7 other guys got a first-place vote, including 3 others who got multiple first-place votes, including a quarterback, which is going to be fun here. Now, the fun thing about doing these polls is sometimes you can tell when someone's just kind of messing around with us, because most of Marvin's votes are anywhere between 1 and 6. Which, I mean, the closer you get to 6, you're like, what? Maybe somebody messed up. Yeah. Well, he got multiple. But for the most part, it was either first or second place votes. But he also got one 10th place vote and one 13th place vote. Which, I mean, listen, we're not all techno savvy, so I'll chalk it up to some of that being that. But Marvin Harrison Jr., a unanimous All-American last year, he is a consensus number 1 pick amongst the Buckeye Talk crew, but he is not a unanimous number 1 pick amongst the Buckeye Talk crew and the Subtexter crew. 614-350-3315. Sign up for the text if you wanted to vote Marvin Harrison Jr., number 1 in our best player on offense poll. Nathan, you're up with the number 2 pick. Who you going with here?
I'm really not trying to overthink this too much. I think it's Emeka Egbuka, and I don't really think it's that close. Now, you can make a case for the quarterbacks, and we're going to obviously talk about them very quickly. But right now, if the season were to get wiped out let's not say it that way. If we were to just like close our eyes, snap our fingers, and we fast forward to next April, like who do we think on this team is like a guaranteed first-round NFL draft pick? Besides Marvin Harrison Jr. on this offense, it's Emeka Egbuka. I think that's really just the one criteria that I have. And he gets overlooked so much. I don't think he's overlooked by opposing defenses. I think he will probably, people are well aware. It's just a pick your poison situation with this receiving core. But I think he's probably also been overlooked in terms of the intrigue that we should have about what his third season should look like. He played a little bit as a freshman. He also had some nice moments in the Rose Bowl. He just didn't get to be featured the same way that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jackson Jigga were in 2021. And how quickly I forgot. I forgot from even the first thing I said on this pod.
Shame. They get on me a lot for pushing receivers off when they're no longer here. Nathan just pulled a Steven by doing that.
Yeah, it was within that 3-minute span. But you could see that, and what he was doing in special teams, even going into last year, you could see it coming, and just became such a reliable receiver. But I wonder if, like, a guy who maybe hasn't had quite the same amount of those sort of viral moments or those, like, real eye poppers, the way that Marvin Harrison Jr. does sometimes, just the way he can contort and make interesting catches in traffic and things like that when he's covered. Like, what does Egbuka start to do that pops him to like a next level and shows what he can do as like a fully rounded athlete now coming into his third year? I'm super intrigued by that, again, especially because he gets to operate off of the attention that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to draw on every single snap.
I think the interesting thing about him is he was talking about it when we talked to wide receivers on Tuesday evening, and he got asked, what's different about you this year? The typical, like, how are you better, all that stuff. And he said, I'm healthy. He wouldn't disclose what the injuries were, I asked, and he just said a couple of nagging things, but he was dealing with a lot of stuff that physically didn't let him maximize himself. And maybe that showed up in the Penn State game where, he just couldn't break loose a lot of the times until that late deep ball from C.J. Stroud. He had started the year off so consistent, being an 100-yard per game guy, and maybe it tailed off a little bit. So if he's going to get through this year and he's just a little bit healthier, plus Marvin Harrison Jr. being the number one thing on maybe everybody's scouting report, he's probably number 2, right, coming into the season. And this is a guy where we're talking about, can we move Marvin Harrison to the slot? Ryan Day used the name Deebo Samuel last year when talking about Emeka Egbuka as a guy who you can use him in the run game on jet sweeps. He's going to be the punt returner this year. Obviously, he's a slot receiver. He can play all the 3 wide receiver positions. I think there's something that's maybe untapped with him as well, with how creative maybe some of those Jackson plays that they didn't get to use last year because he got injured. Maybe some of those go to Emeka Egbuka this year instead of always going to Xavier Johnson, because he can do a lot of that stuff too. Andrew, where was Emeka Egbuka on your list?
Number 2. So for full disclosure, I kind of misunderstood the directions of this pod, and what I did was I just ranked 15 on offense. So
we got the top 2.
we can. But we still got the top 2 players off my big board, so I feel good that I haven't screwed it up too bad. But we're 2 of 2 out of 15. So we'll see where we end up. But yeah, I think Emeka was second for me, and like Nathan said, I'm not sure it was all that close. I think that you really. I mean, you obviously start to get into the nitty gritty right around, the mid to kind of late portion of this here. But yeah, for Emeka, it was pretty clear number 2 for me.
So the Texans agree. He was number 2. He had 67.9% of the second place votes in our poll. His votes ranged anywhere from 1st through 13th, but the bulk of them were 1st through 5th place. He had 2 first place votes, so there's some more first place votes that come off of that tally there. Go ahead, Nathan.
It is interesting. We've seen a couple of people in our texts over the past couple weeks kind of poke back and be a little bit on like, hey, is Marvin Harrison Jr. really like the greatest football player of all time? So I think there's some people who are maybe just a little bit over the hype, and I get it.
Yeah.
I just think I still would vote him number 1.
Yeah, and most of the people who took first place votes from him, they're all understandable as we continue down this list. It's not like Lincoln Keenholz got a first place vote here. They're all reasonable people to vote in first place. I'm going third, and I'm going to take the guy that the Texans also voted third. He got 102 third place votes, 35.2% of the third place votes. So this is where it starts to, spread out a little bit with who got votes where. He also got 1 first place vote, and that's running back TreVeyon Henderson, which I think is an interesting spot because we did a similar exercise going into last year, and he was clearly amongst the top 3. And coming off of last year, dealing with the injuries, dealing with the step back, how much of it was the foot, how much of it was just a regression in overall development, sophomore slump type stuff. I thought maybe he would fall, but I think every time I've thought that our textures might be out on TreVeyon Henderson, the numbers say he's not. They're not. Whether it was him leading the way for driving the bus when we had that pod, or other conversations when we talked about the running backs, or now when we're ranking the top 15 players on the offensive side of the ball, he was top 3 a year ago, and maybe the conversation was, is he 2 or 3 with Jackson Smith-Njigba? That's the conversation, while C.J. Stroud's clearly number 1. Now it seems like he's clearly number 3, but he's still in that conversation to be amongst the top 3 players on this football team. Nathan, does that shock you, or are you just not that surprised that people are still this high on TreVeyon Henderson?
No, it doesn't shock me. I think especially because there isn't quarterback separation right now. I didn't have TreVeyon this high, and I don't think he should have been drafted higher than 3rd. Third, I think, is the highest you could draft him, just because I think there are enough legitimate questions still. And I legitimately believe he was hurt last year. I legitimately believe it affected his performance. And I know that where there was some frustration with the coaching staff as that played out, that there was probably some miscommunications and one party didn't know exactly what the other party was going through. And that's been well documented. So I wouldn't rank him higher than 3rd, but I think the upside here is still massive. That, going into his 3rd year, we saw enough of it as a freshman that you can say that, he still has some things to prove from last year, but there's a reasonable certainty that he can. And this vote may also be influenced by what has been consistent feedback from Ryan Day, from other people you talk to around the program, about the kind of camp that TreVeyon Henderson is having. Like there's buzz building about the fact that he looks back to normal, back to what he was before he got so hurt last year. So that also, I think, is probably playing into this. And I might have voted him lower than where I had him on my, as Andrew put it, big board, if I hadn't been hearing some of the things that I'm hearing in preseason camp.
So where'd you have him at for you?
I had him 5th.
Okay. Andrew, where did you have TreVeyon Henderson? And are you, are you shocked that he's this high?
No, I would have taken him 3rd too if I had the 3rd pick. Because when we did our predictions, like our statistical predictions pod, whenever that was, God, I don't even know anymore. 2 weeks ago, a week ago, whatever. we kind of talked about it and said, injury notwithstanding, blank. Like it's no fun to say, oh, well, this guy might get banged up, blah, blah, blah. Like that's the way that I looked at this. And what are you getting if you're getting a healthy Trevion Henderson? Well, in 2021, he had 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns. He averaged 6.8 yards a carry. Like you're talking about a guy who, if he's fully healthy, like if you're gonna assume that, you can rely on him for 180-ish carries. You can rely on him for probably well over 1,000 yards. You can rely on him for over 10 rushing touchdowns. That's a really, really good player. And I think that if you're going to discuss him like he's fully healthy, which I think you have to, then I would absolutely put him here. I felt pretty good about that. And when you're talking about a guy of that talent, I think that you almost have to kind of take him here.
So Andrew, that's back to you. That's our top three. Marvin Harrison Jr. 1.
Oh, we don't do Snake? Wow. All right. I'll take it. But
not for that.
I thought we were going to do
Sometimes we will. Sometimes we will. Not this time.
We do it for the more competitive ones. That's not really what we're doing here.
Yeah. This is more analysis. So back to you. You have the fourth pick, the first pick of the second round. Who are you going with? And this is where it started to split off for the Texans, really, where there's 3, 4, 5 names who are in the bunch here from 4 to 9.
Good. Well, hopefully this is one of them. So that, like you said, this was hard for me. I debated a couple of guys here. I went with a pick on the offensive line, Donovan Jackson. Steven made a face. Now I'm worried. Look, I like the build that he has. Admittedly, I went back and I watched some YouTube because, again, I was very nervous for this draft. So I watched some of the games last year. I watched what I could on YouTube, and I like, having him in the interior. I like the way that he moves as an interior guy. He's got really long arms. I think that that's important as an interior offensive lineman. He's one of the better interior offensive linemen in the country. And I think, Nathan kind of mentioned this, like if you skip ahead, kind of where are you? Like, all right, well, I think positional value is one thing. I wasn't sure whether I should take that into account, whether you're going to take a guard or do you take a quarterback or a receiver or another running back, whatever. I didn't take into account positional value here, which is why I ended up with Donovan Jackson. So I went offensive line. I went with one of the big boys.
Nathan, where did you have Donovan Jackson on your list?
Oh, no. I had him right below Henderson. And I think this is a perfectly fine range to take him in. And especially because I think that Andrew's right. Like, he has done some good things, but he's another one of these guys that, what is the reason why there is maybe an optimism at Ohio State, around Ohio State, that exceeds even like the surface level of the way that we've been talking about this team? And it's because all of these guys are coming into their third season. It's like every single guy. It's the 2021 class, coming into its own, and he is in that group. I mean, it was a huge deal to get him out of Texas to come up here, a guy with Ohio connections, but still a huge deal to get him to come up here. His trajectory all along has been to be a really fascinating weapon in the running game, potentially. I think that is still on the table this year. I think there's better football ahead of him than he's shown. And when I look at what this team might want to be, he could be critical to that. And it could be something similar to what they did in 2019, where, yes, you had a great quarterback, and yes, you had talented receivers, but you made the running game the foundation of this offense in an important way. And it was behind those interior guys that and now I'm not saying that all three of these guys are Jonah Jackson, Josh Myers, and Wyatt Davis. In fact, I'm saying they're not. But I think you can probably attack this in a similar way. You might be able to make a similar impact having these guys, at least as far as how you're building the offense and what you want it to look like. I think they want to get back to where they can have that interior that is laying that foundation and and then attacking off of that. And he's the guy most poised to be a sort of next level offensive line performer out of this group.
I think of the three interior guys who are starting this year, Donovan Jackson has the best chance and most realistic runway of getting to that ceiling of a Jonah Jackson or a Wyatt Davis was in 2019. Because of that, I think he is the safest number 4 pick, and I think the right pick, because it's a combination of, he was okay last year. He was great. He was good for a first-year starter who was a 5-star recruit. But his ceiling suggests he could be an All-American. And we know he's going to have the legitimate opportunity to have a performance that can earn him All-American status in a way that some of the guys under him, it's not the same. They don't have that same makeup. And I think some of the Texans think that too, which is why he had the second most first-place votes. He only had 4, but it was the second most first-place votes anybody had. The bulk of his votes did still come in the 4th-place spot. He had 30.3% of the 4th-place votes. He had 69. He had 23.8% of his 4th-place votes. He had 28.6% of his second-place votes. So he's right here in that range with those guys. So he was 4th for me as well. And so that's why I was smiling, because I thought that was a very good pick here. A guy who was a former 5-star recruit who's now in year 3, showed you some things in year 2 that he could be on an All-American track this year, especially if they rely on the run game as much as I think they might to start the season here as they're figuring out this quarterback situation. Nathan, we'll let you go with your final pick here, and then we'll take a break. Who did you have at number 5?
So I think maybe we've overthought this a little bit. You picked Kyle McCord to be a Heisman Trophy finalist this year when we just a top 3 when we just did that pick the other day.
I did.
Kyle McCord was 3rd on my list. I'm taking Kyle McCord here. And I don't see a huge separation between him and Devin Brown, and I think that probably is affecting. If one of these guys or the other had been named the starting quarterback already, they would certainly have already been chosen, I think, by one of us, and would have been higher among the texter votes. I think right now the fact that they are so close is being seen as a detriment to both of them, and maybe it is. Maybe we will find that out when we get to Indiana. That Ryan Day, it wasn't that they were both so good. It was that they both had enough issues that it was too much of a concern for him. But I think what's actually happening here is just what we talked about the other day, that this is the way he built this room. He built the competition in this room. Devin Brown has risen to the occasion. It doesn't mean that Kyle McCord hasn't been good. And I think as we've said, if I had to pick right now, the guy that, even if they're playing both of them, the guy who takes the first snap against Indiana is Kyle McCord, based on what Ryan Day told us this week and the way that he sees the balance of those two positions and what those guys are, the experience versus the young guy with maybe more room to grow. So I don't think it's that. I would have taken Kyle McCord 3rd. I'll take him here 6th or 5th, wherever we're at. And I don't know how you could take him much lower, and I'm not sure you could take either quarterback much lower.
The Texans had him 7th. And I'm inclined to agree with the Texans on that. He did have a first-place vote. He did not have the most first-place votes among quarterbacks, which, Devin Brown had the most. He had 3 first-place votes. And that was he had the 3rd most first-place votes. Which is, that's just, you're picking your quarterback there, which one you wanted to go with there. So I do think they split the vote a little bit in terms of where they ended up placing in this conversation. Just to get to it, Devin Brown finished 10th and Kyle McCord finished 7th in this conversation. I think the quarterback still would have finished 7th, though, even if it was an already known starter. And the reason why is I don't think C.J. Stroud would have been a top 5 pick in 2021 going into the season as a first-year starting quarterback when there's talent around him who, going into the season, the perception is they're going to carry he's just more of a game manager and they're going to carry the heavy lifting. And I think the same thing can apply here, where the wide receiver talent, some of the running back talent, some of the guys on the offensive line, or even a tight end, you can make a case that coming into the year, they're better than the first-year starting quarterback who has never started. While halfway through the year, that might start to change.
So where would Kyle McCord be on your list?
I had Kyle McCord 6th.
But you think
there's two more people?
You think he'll be in the top 3 of the Heisman Trophy voting?
By the end of the year, yes.
That.
I don't think
that makes no sense.
How?
You think
We're
he's
talking
Heisman
about
Trophy? You think he will be Heisman Trophy caliber by the end of the season? Is 6th.
Yes, right now. I'm not saying he's going to be 6th on this list by the end of the season. We're saying coming into the season, who are their best players? Not who's going to be the best players when we look back at the end of the year.
Okay.
Like it's no different than if you have a preseason ranking. If that makes perfect sense. If you pick, you can have a team can win a national title, but that doesn't mean coming into the season they're considered the best team in the country.
No, but you don't go into the season taking the team that you think is the 6th best in the country and predicting them to make the playoff. Like you pick the 4 that you think are the 4 best in the country to make the playoff, or the 3 best in the country. In the case that we were talking about with the Heisman Trophy votes, I really am confused by all of this. Like he's a 5-star quarterback who is still set up to potentially be the starting quarterback for the season opener and potentially the starting quarterback all year. And you predicted him to finish in the top 3 of the Heisman Trophy voting, but we're talking about him being the 6th or 7th best player on the offense. And
right now, yes,
that's bizarre to me.
Do you think Kyle McCord on day one? Let's just say Kyle McCord wins this starting job, or even if they do the 2 quarterback system. Regardless, do you think either one of these quarterbacks are going to play like they're one of the 3 best players on this team against Indiana? Are you expecting that?
Yeah, 3, top 3. Do I think he could be
offensive
like the 3rd best player? Yeah, it could happen.
So you think that against Indiana, he's going to be potentially better than Travion Henderson will be against Indiana?
Well, I don't know that we're definitely, I guess I didn't think that we were basing this whole thing just on the Indiana performance. I don't remember getting that directive. I think the question was, you're drafting the 15 best players on Ohio State's offense. And
Correct.
think
coming into the season.
Right, but coming into the season doesn't mean just for what they do against Indiana. There's obviously a situation here where both quarterbacks could be playing. I had McCord 3rd and Brown 4th on my list. Travion Henderson 5th. Like,
okay.
Ohio State recruits and develops the best quarterbacks in the country at a level that they don't do at running back. It's a tier above that, and they send guys to the first round. And I don't have reason to think that these guys aren't in that same tier. And for this offense to be, because of what this offense is, there's every reason to assume that whatever guy gets picked, the production's going to be there.
But production and saying that he's the best player are not the same thing. I think we can both agree on that because of how this offense operates. So he could very easily have the production of a Heisman Trophy candidate and still not be the best player on the team, or even be top 3.
I suppose, yeah.
Andrew, where did you have Kyle McCord and Devin Brown? We can do both here.
Oh boy, I did not have them at 3 and 4. Not to, I guess, throw gasoline on that fire. I had them at 8 and 9. I understand the argument for putting them high because, hey, look, it's an Ohio State quarterback. There's the end of the sentence. It's an Ohio State quarterback. And they recruit quarterbacks at a high level. Like, it's not like they're trotting out like the quarterback. It's not like the quarterback battles between one of us 3 and like Ohio State fans are going to listen to this, and Ohio State fans are going to listen to Ryan Day, and they're going to be like, "Who in the world did they just say is the starting quarterback?" Like, these guys, they're recruited highly, like they're talented players. I just haven't seen it yet, and I don't think anybody's seen it yet. I don't think you can say you have. So I had them down because when I was making my list, I valued past production as kind of an indicator for what you're going to. And I mean, like, I just felt really reachy taking, like, I would have felt really reachy taking Devin Brown 5th or 4th, or I guess so that would have been like my second pick. Like that would have been really scary for me because how do we know? Like, and I understand you have to do some projecting here a little bit, but yeah, I just, for me, the quarterbacks are just such an unknown quantity right now. It scares me.
Well, but are they an unknown quantity to that extent? Like, do you
Yeah.
guys, as
To
you
that
picture
extent,
this
might be
offense,
pushing it. I fully am willing to admit
I
that.
don't I don't think I am not worried about the quarterback play this year, and I think I think that's what you're asking, Nathan. Andrew, are you worried about the quarterback play this year? Because I'm not worried.
No,
I'm with
not in
Nathan
the
in
long
terms of
run.
are
No.
they going to have Heisman production?
Yeah, not in the long run. I'm not worried about the quarterback position. They'll figure it out. It's Ryan Day. It's Brian Hartline. It's Ohio State. Look at their receivers. They'll be fine. The first 4 games, I think there might be some growing pains. Like, I think there might be a couple decisions where, especially when you look back at the quarterbacks that you've had in the last handful, Dwayne Haskins, CJ Stroud, Justin Field, like you look back, I'm not like, I just think that looking back at those guys, I think that like, if you're going to compare them to them, which like, I'm not saying Nathan's doing, but like that would be kind of probably more in line with what I'm saying. Like, I just don't know if that's a realistic standard to set to say, all right, against Indiana, against Youngstown State, against Western Kentucky, against Notre Dame, the first month of the season, the first 4 games, one of these guys is going to play like the number 2, the number 10, the number 8 overall draft pick in the 2024 NFL draft. I didn't feel comfortable doing that.
Well, yeah, but Donovan Jackson's not going to be the number 2 or number 8
Sure,
or number
but
10
I
overall
feel
pick in the NFL draft.
But like Steven said, I felt safer with him because I think you've seen glimpses of it. You've seen him play well, and you can kind of model the projection and say, okay, I think he can have a really nice year this year. You can model that moving forward. Where with these guys, I mean, I understand it's not a total shot in the dark because again, look at who they are. Look at Ohio State's offense. You feel good about that, but you're doing a lot more projecting and you're doing a lot more guesswork than you are for like a Donovan Jackson. That's, Steven said like that was a safe pick. That's kind of what I opted for with this. And that was kind of like, as we go down the list, I think you'll kind of see as we get further and further down, you'll see how I kind of ranked these players a little bit. Safety was big for me when I did this. If you can guarantee me that a dude is going to be at least good, then I was really high on that player.
I know that we had this offseason conversation about would Ohio State win a national championship this year if it had Stetson Bennett at quarterback. And I know that we had a lot of fun at the expense of Stetson Bennett on this podcast over the years. We had egg on our face about it, though, because as it turns out, Stetson Bennett was legitimately one of the best quarterbacks in the country last year in terms of like the not just I'm not talking about just counting numbers production. I'm talking about efficiency and those sorts of things. Stetson Bennett was not substantially off of the Ohio State quarterback standard. It was in the same ballpark. So again, I think if that's what we're thinking, like if it's almost to the point when you start talking about the starting quarterback at Ohio State being like 8th or 9th on this list and below offensive linemen and below tight ends like Cade Stover or whatever, which I assume is what we're going to get to at some point, you're starting to talk about the quarterback play as being this offense is going to succeed in spite of the quarterback play. And I don't think that's the right way to, I don't think that's the right perspective at this point. I know that neither one of these guys has come out and put this away, but I think this is much more a case of if there had been 2 CJ Strouds in 2021, how long would that quarterback race have gone? That's much more close to why hasn't one of these guys pulled away from Kyle McCord, I guess, as CJ Stroud did in 2021 already.
Yeah, I agree with you there. This is like Donovan Jackson was the only offensive lineman I would have considered over Kyle McCord. Like the rest of the list,
sure.
The 4 guys I had in front of Kyle McCord or Devin Brown are those 4 guys who, at their best, are All-American level, first-round level talents. Where it's if we get to the end of the year and you're like, Kyle McCord's a Heisman Trophy finalist, but he's also like the 5th best player on the team. It's like, that's a pretty darn good team. That team probably should win a national championship.
You had
or
McCord
at least be in the national
on your list.
Yeah,
right?
I had Devin Brown. Yeah, I did. The only other player I had ahead of him, and I'll reveal that when we actually draft him. But
Okay.
everybody I had above, all the people I had above him are guys who could do something where at the end of the year, they're on the same list that he's on in terms of All-American list, first round type list and stuff like that. They're not guys outside of that conversation. So those are the first 5 picks.
That's spicy.
Yeah, I got a lot more spicy than I thought I was going to get. Marvin Harrison, number 1. Emeka Egbuka, number 2. Travion Henderson, number 3. Donovan Jackson, number 4. Kyle McCord, number 5. When we come back, I will be up with the 6th pick. When we come back here on Buckeye Talk.